It's the day before Thanksgiving, November 24th, 1971. Airports all across America are packed with people trying to get home for the holidays. Families are excited. Business travelers are rushing to catch their flights. To everyone at Portland International Airport, it feels like just another busy Wednesday. But among the crowd, one man is about to pull off the most unbelievable crime in American history. And more than 50 years later, nobody knows who he really was. Nobody knows if he survived. And nobody knows where the money went. This isn't a movie. This actually happened. And somehow, the man known as D.B. Cooper vanished without a trace. Before we get into this story, you need to understand something. Back in 1971, flying was completely different from what it is today. There were no TSA checkpoints, no body scanners, no ID verification like we have now. You could walk into an airport, buy a ticket with cash, and board a plane within minutes. Nobody searched your bags. Nobody questioned who you were. Looking back today, it almost sounds unbelievable. But that one weakness in airport security created the perfect opportunity for someone with a bold plan. And one man saw it. At exactly 2 p.m., a well-dressed man walked up to the Northwest Orient Airlines ticket counter in Portland, Oregon. He wasn't acting nervous. He wasn't looking over his shoulder. In fact, he looked like every other businessman traveling for work. He appeared to be somewhere in his 40s, about 6 feet tall, around 180 pounds, brown eyes, wearing a black business suit, a white dress shirt, a skinny black tie held together with a simple tie clip, and polished black loafers. Nothing about him stood out. He calmly paid $20 in cash for a one-way ticket to Seattle. When the ticket agent asked for his name, he gave just 2 words: Dan Cooper. No one at the counter had any reason to think that name was fake. Within minutes, he boarded Northwest Orient Flight 305, a Boeing 727 carrying 36 passengers and 6 crew members. To everyone else on board, he was just another guy heading to Seattle, or so they thought. Cooper chose a seat near the back of the aircraft, seat 18C. He ordered a bourbon and soda, lit the cigarette, which was completely normal back then, and quietly looked out the window as the plane prepared for takeoff. Nothing seemed unusual. No sudden movements, no threats, no panic. Just a quiet man enjoying a drink before a short flight. But only a few minutes after the plane left the ground, everything changed. Cooper reached into his pocket, pulled out a small folded note, and handed it to a young flight attendant named Florence Schaffner. At first, she barely looked at it. She assumed it was another businessman trying to flirt with her. That happened all the time in those days. So, she slipped the note into her purse without opening it. Then Cooper leaned toward her. His voice was calm, almost emotionless, and he quietly said, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." In that single moment, an ordinary 30-minute flight turned into the most famous hijacking America had ever seen. Florence Schaffner slowly unfolded the note. Her heart instantly dropped. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a phone number. She looked over at the man sitting beside her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. If anything, he looked unbelievably calm. Then he quietly leaned closer and said, "Miss, I'd like you to sit next to me." There was something about the way he spoke. No panic, no emotion, no wasted words, just complete confidence. Florence carefully sat down, without making a scene, without alerting the passengers. Cooper calmly placed his briefcase on his lap and cracked it open just enough for her to see inside. What she saw would stay with her for the rest of her life. Inside the briefcase appeared to be several red cylindrical objects connected by wires, along with what looked like a battery. Whether it was a real bomb or not has never been confirmed. But in that moment, she had every reason to believe it was real. And Cooper knew she believed him. He wasn't interested in hurting anyone. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't waving a weapon around. Everything about him suggested he had planned every second of this. Then he calmly explained exactly what he wanted. $200,000 in cash. For parachutes. 2 main parachutes. 2 reserve parachutes. and a fuel truck waiting in Seattle so the aircraft could be refueled immediately after landing. That was it. No outrageous demands. No long speech. No threats against random passengers. Just a clear list, delivered with remarkable composure. Florence quietly carried the message to the cockpit. Within minutes, Captain William Scott was informed. The crew immediately contacted Northwest Orient Airlines and federal authorities. At first, nobody knew whether Cooper was bluffing, but no one was willing to take that chance. The FBI was notified. Local law enforcement was notified. Some looked out the window. Others simply relaxed, expecting to land in Seattle in less than half an hour. Behind the cockpit door, a completely different reality was unfolding. To buy time, air traffic controllers told the pilots that Seattle wasn't quite ready for them to land. So Flight 305 remained in the air, circling for nearly 2 hours while authorities scrambled to gather the ransom money and parachutes. And somehow, Cooper never lost his cool. He ordered another bourbon and soda. He even paid for his drinks. According to the flight attendants, he remained polite throughout the entire ordeal. He thanked the crew. He spoke respectfully. He never appeared nervous. That calmness made him even more unsettling, because it suggested one thing. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. This was a carefully planned operation. As the sun began to set over the Pacific Northwest, Seattle was finally ready. The cash had been collected. The parachutes had arrived. Police officers were in position. The FBI was waiting. Everyone believed the nightmare was almost over. They couldn't have been more wrong. Because Cooper's most unbelievable move. The clock was closing in on 6 p.m. when Northwest Orient Flight 305 finally touched down at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. By now, darkness had settled over the runway. Emergency vehicles were parked at a distance. FBI agents, local police, and airline officials were all watching the aircraft from afar. Nobody wanted to make the wrong move, because if Cooper really had a bomb, one mistake could cost dozens of lives. The plane rolled to a stop. Just as Cooper had instructed, the cabin lights were dimmed, and the window shades were lowered to make it harder for authorities to see inside. Outside, airline employees carefully loaded the ransom onto the aircraft. The money had been gathered from several Seattle area banks, $200,000 in $20 bills. Before handing it over, the FBI secretly photographed the serial numbers on every bill, hoping that one day the cash might lead them to the hijacker. Next came the parachutes. Exactly as Cooper had demanded. 2 main parachutes, 2 reserve parachutes. Everything was brought aboard without incident. The exchange was complete. Then Cooper made a move that surprised everyone. He released all 36 passengers, along with most of the flight attendants. Not a single passenger had been harmed. No one had been beaten. No shots had been fired. As confused travelers stepped off the plane, many still had no idea just how close they had come to disaster. But the ordeal wasn't over. Not even close. Only 4 people remained on board. Captain William Scott, First Officer William Radizak, Flight Engineer Harold Anderson, and Flight Attendant Tina Mucklow. Now Cooper revealed the next phase of his plan. He ordered the pilots to take off again. Their destination? Mexico City. But there was a catch. The Boeing 727 didn't have enough fuel to make that trip non-stop. A refueling stop would be necessary later. Cooper didn't argue. Instead, he gave the crew a very specific set of instructions. Fly south. Stay below 10,000 feet. Keep the landing gear down. Leave the wing flaps partially extended and maintain a relatively slow airspeed. The pilots immediately recognized something strange. Those weren't random demands. They were the exact flight conditions needed for someone to safely jump out of the rear stairway of a Boeing 727. At that moment, the crew realized something terrifying. Cooper wasn't planning to escape after landing. He intended to jump, in the middle of the night, somewhere over the rugged wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. Even today, aviation experts say it was an unbelievably dangerous plan. Heavy rain, near freezing temperatures, powerful winds, pitch black skies, dense forests stretching for miles. If Cooper actually went through with it, the odds of surviving seemed incredibly slim. But no one on that aircraft knew just how determined he really was. The Boeing 727 climbed back into the cold November sky. There were no passengers, just 4 crew members, and one man who seemed completely in control. As the aircraft headed south, the cabin was eerily quiet. No shouting, no panic, no dramatic countdown. Just the steady hum of the engines cutting through the darkness. Cooper sat in the rear of the aircraft with the money and the parachutes beside him. He appeared focused, almost like he was mentally checking off the final steps of a plan he'd rehearsed 100 times. Around 7:40 p.m., he turned to flight attendant Tina Mucklow. His voice was as calm as ever. "You can go to the cockpit now." Tina hesitated for a second. She asked if there was anything else he needed. Cooper simply shook his head. No. Those were among the last confirmed words anyone ever heard him say. Tina walked toward the cockpit. A warning light inside the cockpit indicated that the aircraft's aft stairway, the rear staircase unique to the Boeing 727, had been deployed. The pilots couldn't see what Cooper was doing, but they knew exactly where he was. Somewhere behind that closed cabin door, preparing for something almost nobody thought was possible. At approximately 8:13 p.m., the aircraft suddenly lurched. The nose briefly pitched upward before settling back into level flight. It wasn't violent, but it was noticeable. The pilots later told investigators it felt like a significant weight had suddenly left the airplane. That moment would become one of the most analyzed seconds in aviation history. Investigators believe that was the exact moment Dan Cooper jumped into the darkness. 30-degree temperatures, driving rain, winds approaching 200 miles per hour outside the aircraft. No GPS, no cell phone, no way to communicate, just a parachute, a bag containing $200,000, and miles upon miles of mountains and dense forest below. Whether he landed safely or died within minutes remains one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. The flight continued exactly as instructed until it landed safely in Reno, Nevada, where FBI agents and local law enforcement immediately surrounded the aircraft. They stormed on board expecting to find either the hijacker or his body. Instead, the cabin was empty. The money was gone. The parachutes were gone. And Dan Cooper had vanished into thin air. There were only a few things left behind. A black clip-on tie, a tie clip, several cigarette butts that investigators collected at the time. Those cigarette butts were later lost before modern DNA testing could be performed. It was a frustrating setback. The moment Flight 305 landed in Reno, the hunt was on. Within hours, the FBI launched what would become one of the longest and most expensive investigations in the Bureau's history. The operation was given a name, short for Northwest Hijacking. Agents worked around the clock. They searched the aircraft from nose to tail. They interviewed every crew member. They retraced the flight path. And they began searching the dense forests of Washington state, believing Cooper had jumped somewhere near the Lewis River. But there was one huge problem. Nobody knew exactly where he had landed. The weather that night was terrible. Heavy rain, strong winds, and almost zero visibility. Even with radar data and the pilot's testimony, investigators could only estimate the jump zone. It covered hundreds of square miles. Mountain ranges, rivers, deep forests. If Cooper had survived the jump, he could have disappeared in almost any direction. And if he hadn't, nature could have hidden every trace of him. Then something strange happened. As newspapers rushed to cover the story, an early report mistakenly identified the hijacker as D.B. Cooper. In reality, the man had bought his ticket under the name Dan Cooper. But the reporting error spread across the country almost overnight. Before long, every newspaper in America, every television broadcast, and eventually the entire world was calling him D.B. Cooper. The nickname stuck, and it became one of the most famous names in criminal history. Meanwhile, the FBI started receiving tips. Hundreds of them, then thousands. Some callers claimed Cooper was their neighbor. Others insisted he was a former military paratrooper. Some believed he had died during the jump. Others swore they'd seen him alive after Thanksgiving. Agents chased lead after lead. They interviewed former soldiers, skydivers, pilots, criminals, even ordinary businessmen who happened to resemble the composite sketch. Over the years, more than 800 people were investigated as possible suspects. Some seemed convincing at first, but every single lead eventually fell apart. No fingerprints matched. No solid DNA. No confession backed by evidence. Nothing. Then investigators turned their attention to the money. Remember, before handing over the ransom, the FBI had carefully photographed the serial number of every single $20 bill. That decision would become one of the smartest moves in the entire investigation. Banks were alerted. Casinos were alerted. Businesses across the country were quietly informed. If Cooper spent even one of those bills, there was a chance someone would notice. Months passed, then years. Not a single verified ransom bill appeared anywhere in circulation. It was as if the money, and the man carrying it, had simply vanished. At this point, the mystery had become even bigger than the hijacking itself. Did Cooper survive and hide forever? Or had the forests of the Pacific Northwest kept his secret buried all along? The answer seemed impossible to find. But nearly 9 years later, a young boy digging in the sand would stumble upon a discovery that shocked the entire nation. For nearly 9 years, the investigation went nowhere. No body, no parachute, no confirmed sightings, no ransom money. It was as if Dan Cooper had simply disappeared into the night. On a quiet afternoon in February 1980, everything changed. An 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was spending the day with his family along the banks of the Columbia River at a place called Tennebar, just northwest of Portland. As he dug into the sand with a small plastic shovel, he uncovered something unusual. It looked like old, decaying bundles of cash. At first, no one realized what they were looking at, but when investigators examined the bills, the serial numbers matched the FBI's ransom list. Exactly. A total of $5,800 was recovered. The bills were badly damaged after years underground, but they were undeniably part of the money handed to Cooper in 1971. It was the first, and to this day, the only confirmed ransom money ever found. But instead of solving the mystery, it created even more questions. How did the money end up there? Did Cooper bury it? Did floodwaters carry it downstream? Or had someone else found the money years earlier? No theory answered every question, and none could be proven. The FBI continued investigating for decades. Over the years, several suspects attracted public attention. Others had aviation experience. A few even resembled the famous composite sketch. One of the most talked about names was Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., a man who carried out a remarkably similar skyjacking just a few months later. But investigators eventually ruled that he was not Cooper. Another frequently discussed suspect was Kenneth Christensen, a former Northwest Airlines employee. Some believed his knowledge of aircraft made him a strong candidate. But once again, no conclusive evidence ever tied him to the crime. There were many theories, but no proof. Then, in 2016, after 45 years of investigation, the FBI made a surprising announcement. The Bureau officially suspended active investigation into the Cooper case. Not because the mystery had been solved, but because every credible lead had been exhausted. Even today, the case remains officially unsolved. What really happened? Did Dan Cooper survive one of the most dangerous parachute jumps ever attempted? Did he quietly live out the rest of his life under a different name? Or did he perish somewhere in the remote wilderness, taking his identity and most of the ransom money with him forever? No one knows. And that's exactly why this story refuses to die. More than half a century later, the name D.B. Cooper still represents the greatest unsolved skyjacking in American history. A man who boarded a plane under the name Dan Cooper, hijacked it without firing a single shot, collected a fortune in ransom, stepped into the darkness, and vanished. Maybe someone somewhere still knows the truth. Maybe the final piece of evidence is sitting unnoticed in an old attic. or buried beneath the forests of the Pacific Northwest. Until that day comes, the legend of D.B. Cooper will remain one of America's greatest mysteries. And maybe that's exactly how he wanted it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of America's most fascinating unsolved mysteries, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments. Do you think D.B. Cooper survived the jump? Or was this the perfect crime that ended in tragedy? I'll see you in the next case.